Okay, thank you very much. Now we look forward to a presentation from Mr. Guth about how to cope with price volatility, the EU perspective. And we do not need slides, as far as understood. No?
Yeah.
Very
Thank
good.
you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me for this interesting event. My name is Eckart Guth. I'm working after my retirement from the Commission Services for the Global Forum for Food and Agriculture in Berlin, which is an association which brings together the German agriculture and food industry. Now, as I want to stick to the time, Chairman, and if I speak too long, please signal it to me, because at the beginning of my career, I made a very bad experience. I was giving one of my first speeches, and I was speaking a little bit too long, and one after the other from the audience left the room. And at the end, there was only one lady sitting there, and obviously I thanked her was grateful for listening to me, and but then she stood up and said, "I'm not listening to you, I have to clean the room once you have finished." So I do not want to happen this again. So I have no slides, no graphs, no formulas to present to you, but what I can present to you is 35 years of experience, not in agriculture, but around agriculture, from the external relations point of view, from the agriculture trade point of view, from the budgetary point of view, and also a little bit from the development point of view. Now, first of all, I would like to say something about the political dimension of price volatility. As it has been said, they have always existed, and they will continue to exist. But we can only repeat it again and again. Not all price volatilities and price movements are problematic. I think we should hope that we can agree that they are only problematic once they are not reflecting market fundamentals. But I have heard nobody being able to identify which of the movements which go beyond the normal price fluctuation which are necessary are excessive. So that's what we only should fight against. It is also important to distinguish whether we look at price volatility from the point of view of consumers, producers, from the point of view of developed countries, or from the point of view of net importers or net exporters of food. I think what causes the greatest concern, and I will come back to that, is when the poor consumers in developing countries are affected by too high prices, and when they cannot afford to buy food, the minimum food which they need. And then it comes to food price volatility turns to a problem of hunger. And that's where the political problem starts with, when we have instability in countries and food riots, as we have seen in 2008 and 2007, 2009. Much of the Arab Spring has to do with this phenomena, and that is where we have to care most about. We have also to care about the impact on farmers, etc., and incentives, etc. But when it becomes a political dimension is when it causes hunger and food riots and instability in certain countries. Now, what is the interest and the role of the European Union in that? It has been mentioned several times, the role of the European Union in agriculture, important exporter, importer, etc. I don't have to repeat that. But I think all in all, one can summarize that the EU has a great interest in the well-functioning of agriculture world markets, and also in the development of countries into more prosperity and stability. Now, something else, we have spoken about the root causes of price volatility. I don't want to go into it in detail, but I would like to mention some of the root causes, where we have some possibility to have an impact on them. And that is from also a little bit from, against the background of my experience, very much in the trade area, where there is still room for improvement. Now, many industrialized countries, the United States, Canada, but also the EU had very trade distorting instruments over a long period, and thanks to the reform in the Uruguay round and ensuing reforms, things have fundamentally changed. But for a long, long time, and from my point of view for too long, but that's easy to say, that things should have been done earlier, there was a downward pressure on world market prices through export subsidies, food aid. There was also through the isolation of the national markets, distortions on the world market. There were a lot of quantitative restrictions which isolated the internal market from the world market signals. There was food aid was misused quite often and heavily, but in this case mainly by the United States, as a surplus disposal scheme. And from this depressed food prices, many net food importing countries have benefited, it was said. So they appreciated it. The North, the Maghreb, Mashreq states appreciated cheap food to feed their huge population, but also in Africa, many countries got used to the low prices and low food imports. They put the emphasis on other policy areas, and as a result, they neglected their agriculture sector, with the effect, and that I would also like to consider, that some of the increases of the world market prices are probably also due to the fact that agriculture had been neglected for too long and too much, especially in African countries. Now, from these things, we have to learn some lessons. Now, what lesson has been learned in the EU? It has been mentioned, you probably know it, that we have transformed fundamentally the system, and especially now from the external point of view, with the transformation of import levies into tariffs, through the permanent long-term reduction of export subsidies, and with reducing trade distorting measures on the production side through decoupled income aid. The result of this reform is that today we have an agriculture policy which is, and again I'm talking only on the external side. On the external side, I would say it's almost perfect, because we get today price signals from the world market, not to the full effect, but there's still some tariff protection, but we are not anymore, the European agriculture is not anymore as much isolated from the world market as was before, and we have seen the picture that the internal prices are fixed at a level that they are not anymore effective, and price signals in terms of volatility have repercussions on the community market. Now, I think that is good news, and I'm pleased to say this, because for too long I have been a heavy critic. Tassos knows it, when things went wrong with high speed in the wrong direction, and now we have turned it around, and we are not only in the good direction, but we have a system which takes into account the responsibility of the European Union for the external markets, and that is good news. Now, the question is, why have people not learned from export embargoes? Different subject. The rule book of the WTO is not allowing fully fledged export constraints, export embargoes, but the discipline put on export embargoes is very weak. So they have, I will come back to that. As a matter of fact, many countries use this instrument when it comes to high prices and when they fear food shortage on their internal market. And we have seen that in 2008, 2009, when countries like 2007, 2008, when first Ukraine, Argentina, India, Russia, Kazakhstan were introducing embargoes on wheat, and others, India, Egypt, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Indonesia on rice, and others on oilseeds. This created havoc in the market, and it was at that time considered as one of the most serious distortions and the most serious reasons for the further increase of price volatility because there was also panic buying and export restrictions, so that it was exacerbating the effect of the normal price volatility which was in the market at that time. I think that it is interesting to see what the US International Trade Commission was saying after the long time ago US embargo on oilseeds. They came to the conclusion that the embargo resulted in increased production by foreign competitors after the embargo. Inter alia, the EU introduced at the time the oilseed aid, which caused long-term problems. It inspired other countries to diversify their buying of these products, and it caused a loss in trust in the US as a supplier, and obviously it caused chaos on the world market. So this is a very good conclusion for the effect of export embargoes, but these lessons obviously have to be learned quite often, and it's difficult to see how things would change in the near future. Now, another subject, how to cope with price speculation, and if I understand Harald von Witzke right and others, there is no effect of price of speculation on price volatility, then obviously you wouldn't have anything to do about it. But in the political context, it is very controversially discussed, and you know, when politicians are under pressure and they ask the officials and scientists and advisors to do something about it, and there was a conviction that, contrary to you, Harald, and some others, there is still some not precisely identified effect of speculation on the price volatility. Therefore, the need to do something about it. And the G20 had also made some recommendations how to better regulate future markets. And the EU has introduced in this January a revised directive for the future markets, where also some impact can be expected on the future markets for agriculture products. I don't want to go into the details. I have not seen yet an analysis, a scientific analysis about the pros and cons of this way of tackling price speculation. But my impression is that the Commission, the European institution, it was a proposal from the Commission, this approved by the Council and the European Parliament, they have a very cautious approach into working on price volatility and on speculation, on the effects of speculation. They want to have more transparency, more information, more limiting the algorithmic trading, high-speed trading, things like that, and basically also gather information to be in a position to intervene when it is strictly necessary. Now, that needs to be seen whether it produces the results which are expected. Now, something on the possibility to improve the agriculture trade rules and the rules on food aid. You all know that the Uruguay agreement in 1994 was a very historical event. It brought agriculture rules into the purview of the WTO for the first time. It has produced very important effects in the area. It was one of the reasons why the Commission has done it before, the European Union before the Uruguay round was concluded. But it was at that time when the pressure grew, and things have been moving in all industrialized countries in the same direction. So it was an important, very important step, which produced a lot of good results. But Uruguay round was unfinished business, and it is unfortunately still unfinished business today. And I think there is still quite some scope for improving the agriculture trade markets, the world market, and it would not in a spectacular way, but in quite a number of areas diminish the trade distorting effect of the rules which, or the flexibility which still is in the system, for example on export subsidies, where the European Union luckily is not using them almost not anymore. But in the rule book, our commitment is much higher than what we do. And there's always a risk when things change, politicians change, the commissioner changes, you never know. And then one moves backwards. And therefore it would be important also to use the ongoing negotiation for much too long to make further progress towards reducing the trade distorting measures on agriculture. As I said, it would remove much of the still present flexibility which is in the system. For example, countries with high tariffs can respond, and some have done, and on a limited scope also the European Union reduced the external protection, which is in form of tariffs, sometimes still very high. They can reduce it in order to get the food imports which they want, but it adds an element of uncertainty to the world market and increases, very difficult to quantify, but combined these things can have an impact on the world market. I think that it is possible to allow for decoupled income aid is a very important measure to allow the transition from the old system to the new system. The question whether this decoupled income aid should be degressive and phased out is another one, and a difficult one, but at least I think that it provides safety measure for the farmers, safety net, and at least the countries which use decoupled aid or still income support, that should put these farmers in a position to absorb the price volatility on the world market, and also should put politicians in a more comfortable situation to resist temptations to introduce trade distorting measures. Now, the greatest political difficulty is to handle the export embargoes. In the WTO, it is possible to, it's a very soft discipline. You have to, export restrictions have to be temporary, and for in times of extreme food or shortage of food for food products. So it has never been tested very seriously in the WTO what is temporary and what is serious shortage of food. There's one panel case which had been applied against raw earth from China. So there's some attempts to clarify this question of export embargoes. But I don't expect that even if the round would be concluded tomorrow, big surprise, that export embargoes would be included, because I don't think that the WTO members would add on the big issues which they still have on the slate, add another big issue which would delay the round even further. So I'm not very optimistic on this side. Now, what can countries do, especially developing countries? And that's where I think is the biggest concern. You have on the one side the food net food exporters. They obviously are interested in higher prices. If the prices are going down, then we talk about floor prices and things like that. And then I think we are on a very slippery road. And I hear this quite often, and I would like to share one of my experience with you. I would seriously warn against all attempts to outsmart the markets. And there is this attitude among politicians, sometimes also among officials, to know better than the market knows. So there's a lot of area where I think governments and administrators can do a lot of good things. For example, the AMIS approach to gather information, to be better informed, to set a certain regulatory wide framework, that is okay. But all areas to manage the market is a very dangerous approach. And we have learned it at a very high cost in the European Union, and I would warn to duplicate these things on a national level or regional level in other countries. Now, as I said, the most serious cases when we have net food importing countries, which they are net food importers, so they're dependent on food, and when the prices are going up in there, and then you can run into situations where people have hunger, and where the hunger increase, the food price increase, the share, and the expenditure for food is growing so much that you have food riots and political instability. So that is the area where I think still there is need to look in. That is the biggest area where is need to look into, and food aid, emergency reserves can play an important role there. We should not totally push aside the need for food aid, but I would warn against state intervention because it can quickly become very costly. And the question is whether this money is spent best in introducing floor prices and intervention mechanisms, and whether it would not be better to use the money if they have it and if it's provided to them through development aid, etc., whether they should not use it in order to develop the production base in their agriculture sector through a better infrastructure, better training, investment in storage capacities, etc., etc. So there's a lot which needs to be done to help these countries to develop their sustainable production basis, but not through too inefficient and costly state intervention measures. A last point is, I think at the very end, the most promising and the most important instrument to attenuate the effect of price volatility is to put people or countries in a position that the consumer earn enough money that they can buy food, if necessary, also at some time at a higher price. But this aspect of the development and the increase of the consumer capacity to buy food has been largely neglected today, and that's why I want to mention it as a last important point. Thank you very much.